So, the Webmaster here, otherwise on my other channel known as John Spencer, different topic. Today I want to talk about Google Fonts because all webmasters use them. WordPress calls them and uses them. My e-commerce and every e-commerce website solution uses them. Yeah. And I've been webmastering since about 1997, 1998, where Google Fonts didn't exist. So here's why you shouldn't use them and why they should be actually not used and banned or just open for optional use like they used to be. And there is a solution which I'll come to at the end, so you'll have to listen to the end for the solution. But you shouldn't really use Google Fonts. And here's why. When I first started, the internet was very slow. We only had 128 to 256 kilobytes a second, not megabytes, kilobytes. Yeah. And it was Web 1.0, which means we didn't call it that, we called it the internet, or the World Wide Web. And basically on your computer, as most of you know, or on your mobile, well, on your computer, you have fonts. You have Times New Roman, yeah, you have Arial, you have Verdana, and so on, yeah. And when I used to make my website, I could either download a fancy font, because a lot of people like to use a fancy font, which is why Google Fonts exist, and actually put it into my website so that it loads in the website. But then again, if the person in those days didn't have that font on their computer and you displayed a font to them, then they couldn't see it. It would be replaced, which is why a webmaster, and if you're a webmaster, which you probably are if you're listening, you can define which font is called in your CSS file. So when people open the page in the browser, you could write font dash family colon Times New Roman comma Verdana comma Arial comma and then the word serif or sans dash, meaning hyphen serif. Serif means like an L that has a little hook on the top, or if it's just very straight plain letters, or if it's curly letters like we used to use in the old days. An L on the top would put a little curl on it, which comes from the Sanskrit, and like in Thai language you start with a little round curl in every letter. Anyway, that slowly disappeared in Romanized characters. So, here's the point. I always would choose Times New Roman or Arial or Verdana, any font that was on all Windows and Mac computers as the main font for my website. Which means when your website page loads, the load speed is very fast. Yeah, and it needed to be back in those days because we had a slow internet and static web, yeah. So your images had to be small. If not, they took ages to load. And put your fonts that set the font to a font that the viewer, the user, the reader of your website has on their computer. And you know, Times New Roman, Verdana, Arial, you look on a PC and you see what fonts are already there. You know what fonts to use. So I would just set it to a font that's already on their computer, and the page would load straight away and display it as I want it. Because if you define a font that they don't have, it's going to be replaced by a font they have on their computer anyway, and change the look of the website from the font, the characters of writing. So if you did cartoony handwriting for your hippie website, yeah, and somebody came with an old computer that just has Times New Roman, they'd see it in Times New Roman, which is like a book from the 1960s, the printed letters, yeah, a bit like a typewriter. Well, not so much. That's called typewriter actually, that font. So And the other way is if you want to use Google Fonts, at least to speed it up halfway so that it only takes the time that your website takes to load, instead of first calling from Google Fonts, all of the fonts, when somebody opens a website, your website in the browser, if you're using Google Fonts, the first thing in WordPress, or first of all, I insert my e-commerce widget into my WordPress store. So my e-commerce widget, my e-commerce solution, also uses Google Fonts. So I can see it in the bottom of the browser. It's looking for and calling Google Fonts as the page is loading, and it's still a white page. Yeah. And after that, it's looking for the Google Fonts, which WordPress is calling Google Fonts from Google. So I see a double call on Google Fonts, both of which take about a second. So that's 2 seconds more on your load time of your web page just from the fonts, never mind the images and the JavaScript and all sorts of stuff, yeah? So it's slowing down your website. And it doesn't guarantee that the people on the other side are going to see in those fonts, because it depends what version, what operating system they have and what fonts on their computer, and if their computer is able to actually display that font. Also, as a last note, I got a warning from Google Search Console, which is where you do check if your website's okay and submit new pages to Google. And it gave me warnings that there was one dangerous, unsafe file, and it was a Google font. So from their thousands of fonts, there was one font they'd uploaded to a server that wasn't HTTPS, Secure Sockets Layer. They'd uploaded it to a HTTP. And so I was getting security warnings from Google about a Google font that wasn't safe. So Google made an unsafe font, serve it to every website, and then give you a warning that there's an unsafe font on your website, which comes from them, themselves. So that's why you shouldn't use Google Fonts. It slows down your website. There might be the odd font that it's not a secure link, and triggers warnings and gives you bad SEO, search engine optimization. And for displaying the same on every computer, it's best to take the standard fonts that exist on every computer and screw Google Fonts. And anyway, I like to read readable text, and I think most people do. And it might be nice to arrive on a cowboy website and see cowboy writing and cowboy fonts for the first time. But after a while, it's just going to get corny and get on your nerves. So I wouldn't advise to use those fancy Google fonts anyway, for that reason as well. But the main reason is that you're calling it from, it's a third-party website, third-party content. It's from Google, but Google actually punishes you for the third-party content. You mix and match in one page. I've got my e-commerce widget in there. I've got some links from somewhere else in there. I've got my fonts from Google being called. I've got scripts from GitHub being called, and from Microsoft being called, and Bing being called. And it's trying to load all of that stuff, and sometimes Bing is updating, or Google's updating, or my e-commerce store is updating, which means if they're updating, one of the or half a dozen of the links that it's looking for before it displays your web page can't be found because they're external. Even if your server's up, if the things that are being called in your homepage coming from third parties on other domain websites, other URLs, if just one of them's down, your browser's going to be hanging there looking for it, calling it. So you might end up with a 10 to 15 second website load and a very bad Google ranking, because one of the things that's in your page, which is being called from elsewhere, from somebody else that you're using, is slowing you down, such as Google Fonts or Beautify.js and stuff like that, yeah. And it's better, what you can do is download the Google Fonts to your website and put them in your website so you can serve them directly. And you can do that with JavaScript as well, but you'll have to go into the core files and change the location of the JavaScript file that is called. But if you do that, that will be faster than calling it from other websites, which might be down when your page is trying to load. And if any of the websites which have scripts or fonts externally called when your page is loading are down, you're going to see your page there looking for Google Fonts, looking for googlefonts.com, looking for Google Fonts at google.com or whatever, yeah? And it's going to be loading and loading and loading. So it's better to just use standard fonts that are on your computer and on everybody's computer for your default fonts in your website, regardless if it's Blogger, WordPress, your own homemade full stack website, or whatever. And Google Fonts really are a pain in the ass. And the Gen Z and the millennial generation never got to realize that because they didn't webmaster before we started using external third-party content, mixing it, mixed content. And Google punishes you for so much mixed content. And it can really destroy your search rankings. So I've now started linking to the YouTube video of my article instead of inserting it into my articles, because Google really doesn't like it if there's some mixed content in there, yeah? So the days of mixed content in the moment are over until Google changes again. Although it mixes its own content, that doesn't mean that you should, because what it punishes you for, it doesn't punish itself for. And sometimes it also punishes itself for. Like it's punishing me for having a Google font that's not safe, which I can't remove because it's on google.com and it's from Google. And Google's warning me about one of their own fonts that's unsafe. And these days you don't get the chance to not call Google fonts because it's a standard part of WordPress or a standard part of most CMS or software you're using, unless you go into the core files and take that out and do not call them, yeah, or download them and put them on your own website, which doesn't guarantee that the viewer on his computer is going to see them, because he might only have Times New Roman, Arial and Verdana and the usual shit, and it might be a version of Windows that doesn't display the Google font, so you really shouldn't use them. And the fact they're being called from somewhere else just slows down your website. Use the fonts that are already there. What do you need to be calling more and more and more and more things from other websites that might be down or might not be down? And if they're down, they're going to slow down your page load. So that's what I think about Google Fonts. So that was the Webmaster. Otherwise, John Spencer, signing off.